It's Monday, it's February 16th. I'm Megan McKinney. You're listening to Here First from IPR. A Southeast Iowa bridge that's been closed for 18 years is finally going to be replaced with the help of federal funds. But IPR's James Kelly reports some Burlington residents say who should get credit is up for debate.
1st District Republican Congresswoman Marionette Miller Meeks was in Burlington to celebrate securing $6 million in federal funding for the project. But she was welcomed by a crowd of protesters who blamed her for voting against a 2021 infrastructure law. Sandy Krell Andre, who lives just outside Burlington, says Miller Meeks doesn't deserve the credit for the funding finally being approved.
She did put in a request for the funding, just in case, but she voted against the bill. So she was trying to hedge her bets and came into town trying to take credit.
Miller Meeks says she fought to include the $6 million in a spending package passed by Congress earlier this month. I'm James Kelly, IPR News.
A proposed federal ruling would limit which waters and wetlands are protected under the Clean Water Act. Conservation advocates argue the revision is much too narrow, while farm groups support the change. Harvest Public Media's Jess Savage has more.
A wave of letters, signed by environmental advocacy groups across the country, say the new definition ignores science and leaves the vast majority of remaining American wetlands unprotected. Nancy Stoner is a senior attorney at the Environmental Law and Policy Center. She says when lawmakers first wrote the Clean Water Act, they intentionally made it broad so it could protect more water resources.
They thought they were fixing the problem. And if you went back to the members of Congress from 1972 and you said, we just decided most of the waters in the United States are actually not protected by the Clean Water Act, I think they would be appalled.
Some farm advocacy groups like the American Farm Bureau Federation praise the redefinition, saying it offers needed clarity to farmers about whether parts of their fields should be considered protected wetlands. For Harvest Public Media, I'm Jess Savage.
The first Democrat to announce a bid for Iowa's U.S. Senate seat has ended his campaign, leaving two other candidates in the Democratic primary race. Nathan Sage, a native of Mason City, served in the U.S. Army and Marine Corps, worked in radio, and resigned as director of the Knoxville Chamber of Commerce last spring to campaign full-time. Sage's campaign focused on working-class issues. In a video statement over the weekend, Sage said his campaign didn't raise enough money to continue running.
This has been one of the hardest decisions of my life. I didn't step into this race lightly, and I don't step away lightly. I'm not done speaking truth to power and holding Republicans and even Democrats accountable.
Both Democrats who remain in the race issued statements praising Sage's perspective. State Representative Josh Turek of Council Bluffs says Sage ran a campaign with grit and determination that put working people first. State Senator Zach Walz of Coralville says Sage highlighted the need to challenge the status quo and make the race about real life for real people. Two other Democrats left the race last fall. A bill has passed the Iowa Senate with bipartisan support that would change training requirements to become a foster parent. Currently, applicants must complete at least 30 hours of training. This bill would eliminate that hour requirement, and instead, the Department of Health and Human Services would determine a training course based on the applicant's expertise. Several topics would still be required, like trauma and behavior management. Mary Beth O'Neill leads Four Oaks, the state's contractor for training foster parents. She says this proposal addresses Iowa's shortage of foster parents.
We want training to be competency-based, so we don't want to train people who have areas of expertise. We value their time. We don't want to make it redundant. When you make the training more complicated, we lose families throughout the process.
Safety parameters like background checks and home studies are not changed under this bill. No groups were registered opposed to the bill. It's Here First from IPR. I'm Megan McKinney. More on what's happening in the state capitol. There's a bill in the Iowa legislature that would ban nearly all abortions in the state. A look at how far that ban would go and other proposals on abortion state lawmakers are considering. That's in just a moment on Here First. Stay with us. Welcome back to this Legislative Monday of Here First from IPR. I'm Megan McKinney. Happy Legislative Monday. We are entering week 6 of Iowa's legislative session, and we've been following along with IPR's Katerina Sostarek. Hey, Katerina.
Good morning, Megan.
There are a few bills that target abortion. Let's talk about the concept that is advanced in the House and Senate, restricting mail-ordered abortion pills.
So there are licensed medical providers as well as unlicensed groups outside of Iowa who will send the 2 drugs that are approved for medication abortions to Iowans who request them. But Republican lawmakers in both chambers have been saying that's not safe, and they're trying to crack down on those mail-order abortion pills by requiring them to be provided to the patient in person in a healthcare setting. But medical providers say they think these bills would do nothing to affect out-of-state abortion providers and instead would make things harder for the in-state providers trying to follow the law. A House committee advanced one of these bills last week with some changes, and a Senate committee is also expected to take this issue up this week.
There's another bill that has its first subcommittee tomorrow that would further restrict abortion in Iowa. How far does that ban go with the proposal?
The bill would ban all abortions, except in medical emergencies, and anyone who provides an abortion could be charged with a Class A felony and face life in prison without parole. Under current law, most abortions are banned about 6 weeks into pregnancy, and doctors who violate that face licensure discipline. So this would be a huge change. The bill also specifies that pregnant women would not be charged with a crime for seeking an abortion.
How likely is this to pass?
The bill was sponsored by 24 House Republicans, and Speaker Pat Grassley said it's too early to say if it has the 51 votes needed to pass the House. But even just scheduling this initial hearing is a big deal because lawmakers have filed bills to ban all abortions in the past, but to my knowledge, they were never given a hearing.
All right, moving on. State lawmakers still haven't agreed on K-12 school funding and have passed the deadline to do so. Where does school funding proposals stand now?
Well, last week, the Senate passed a 1.75% school funding increase, and today the House is planning to hold a subcommittee hearing on that bill. But House Speaker Pat Grassley says they'd change that to be at least a 2% increase. The governor proposed a 2% per student increase, so top Republicans are still going to have to get together to figure out an agreement there. And Democrats and public schools say none of these numbers are enough to keep up with rising costs and to prevent budget cuts at the local level.
This week in the legislature is an important one in the legislative process in Iowa, known as Funnel Week. How does that deadline work?
Bills need to get approved by a committee by the end of this week to have a chance at moving forward. But there are lots of exceptions to that. Tax and spending bills aren't subject to the deadline, and Republican leaders can always find ways to bring policies back to life later on. But the deadline helps narrow down the number of bills being considered.
What proposals have you been following that are safe for this deadline?
The governor's bill to restrict local civil rights ordinances advanced last week. So did a bill that says parents can't be accused of abuse for raising kids consistent with their sex at birth, including sending them to conversion therapy. There's a bill that aims to expand access to subacute mental health services that got through a committee. And the bill to keep habitual offenders in jail for at least 20 years advanced. And legislation related to eminent domain and carbon pipelines is also still alive.
What are some bills you're watching this week to see if they make it through?
Well, that bill we talked about that would ban basically all abortions is a big one. We'll see if that gets through a subcommittee and then a committee this week. I'll be watching a public assistance bill that would bar people without legal status and some other immigrants from a nutrition program for pregnant women and babies. And there are some bills that seek to restrict access to obscene books in public libraries and so much more.
So much to keep track of. Thank you for your work, Katerina.
Thanks, Megan.
And thank you for taking the time to be informed about what's happening in Iowa and the world this Monday. I'm Megan McKinney. Have a great day.